I think we're going to war for real.
I'll tell you one little story that I probably have never told anybody before.
We got hit with a NVA sapper company supported by infantry.
It's not easy, and that one was tough, but fortunately it worked out for us.
Welcome to War Stories, conversational military history.
We can dive in at any point. Sometimes I try to like really nail it.
Yeah.
Like, all right, we're all done with the small talk. Now it's game time. But other times I feel like we'll probably just glide into it. So
yeah,
we've already talked about the weather. That's how you start conversations in Ohio.
Tennessee too, so we're good there.
Well, let's set some ground rules first. How about that? So
okay,
what are we going to call you?
No.
Should we do this by age?
Let's wait and see. Yeah, what's the October 85?
Stewie is 2 days younger than me, so I am his senior. So and then Preston's older.
Let's first, can we also get out in the air the weird similarities?
Yeah, so now we'll say our guest today on War Stories, Preston Steele. So I'm Preston Stewart, Sayre Payne's here. If you're watching the video on YouTube, we're going to point to each other, but the tiles are lined up differently on everybody's screen, so that's not helping. Sayre, I just saw you point to Preston Steele when you're talking about me, so that'll be even more confusing. But yeah, I don't know. I think I know one or two other Prestons my whole life, so this will be nice and confusing. Let's get into those other similarities because it's kind of goofy.
Yeah, it's good backstory.
Sayre, this is your story. I feel like you're the link.
You're the connector.
Well, my connection. Okay, Preston Steele, I've known my whole life. And so I've always had a Preston in my life. Preston is
you're a better man for it.
It's not a common name. Right?
Yeah.
Preston Stewart just said he only met a couple.
Yeah.
But Preston's a twin. His brother's name's Parker.
And my brother's name is Parker. Yeah.
Preston Steele married a Megan. Preston Stewart married a Megan.
I did, yeah.
And both were Army officers. You know what I mean? Like even that similarity too, which not everybody's a military officer.
Yeah.
But let alone all of those other similarities, pretty hilarious. But yeah, I've always had a Preston in my life. Now I have two, but that's still funny that it comes with a Parker and a Megan.
That's right. It's a full package, man. You're welcome.
It's too bad.
Did you go by? And I did. This was my question for Preston, for Stewie, would be.
We can do that.
Did you go by Preston Park? Was that ever a thing?
No.
Preston Park.
Shorten your names.
Wait, like as a group, like
you
people
were
would refer to us as nobody ever called me Press. Never.
I was Press.
Never.
And my brother Parker's Park.
Yeah.
All through childhood. That's probably what we said. I don't even think I said Preston. I lived him in Preston Park. So there we go. We call him Press.
Often confused for the same person. Preston Parker's house.
Yeah. But they came in tandem.
Oh yeah, one person.
I mean, they were twins.
Yeah.
You know, they were twins, always getting yelled at. So you had to shorten those names.
Yeah.
Did Parker go into the Army or military?
Yeah, he was. He joined the Army National Guard out of high school, like I did. But he joined the public affairs. So yeah, he went on to CCAD and used his experience with Columbus College of Art and Design.
Gotcha.
And he was a photographer with the Mobile Public Affairs Detachment out of Columbus at Rickenbacker. So, I mean, he did 4 years, I believe, in the Guard, and did the college thing, and that was 2003. So
Parker did a great little deal if you think about it. He got into photography in high school, said I want to go to college for this, and probably didn't know what, but knew he wanted to do something photography related. So he got Columbus College of Art and Design, well known in Columbus, Ohio. But then that costs money, obviously. And, their family has a lot of long line of service. That's a part of it. Their older brother was in the Navy just before. And Parker did the Guard, and these are the Bush Cheney years, but he did the Guard and his Guard job was photography. And so he had to do the basic and the AIT just like anybody else does. And that, and the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year type thing. And he almost went to Kosovo, but that didn't happen. And so he did his time with college, concurrent, graduate, shake hands with the military. Hey, thank you for your service. Thank you for yours. Move on and be a civilian. Apply that college degree, which is what he did and does.
Yeah.
To this day.
I wish those little jobs were more well known. I feel like the vast majority of kids, 16, 17, 18, you're either going to be in a tank or carrying a rifle with the infantry when it comes to the Army, and that's it. Maybe some guys are I'm oversimplifying it. There's plenty of people that want to be medics, right? Or dog handlers or MPs, but I don't think very many people with like a graphic arts background realize that there's spots in the Army to do that. Not a ton, but they're out there.
Yeah, it goes back to just service, right? I mean, it goes back to just being able to serve whatever that skill set is and being able to apply it. There's a job out there, right? And not everybody's going to be a trigger puller, you know. But that's, you know,
the vast majority aren't.
And those are the more marketable skills to follow, right? So those shouldn't be overlooked. I mean, look at, you know, the whole experience of getting out, Sayre, and you know, trying to justify, yeah, it's leadership being an infantry officer, but what marketable skill are you bringing to the table? We know how to sell it. I mean, but somebody on the other side of the fence, like, you know, tell me again what the maintained combat readiness means, right?
I'm not convinced that we do know how to sell it. I tried. Okay. Well, what I mean by that is I don't know.
You didn't go through a JMO recruiter then. Or maybe you did. I don't know.
I worked with one of them, tinkered around with a couple there, but I'm speaking pretty broadly here. And I guess from my personal experiences, I don't think I ever did a very good job relaying that exactly what experiences from the military could translate to. I ended up in a great job in Chicago, but was hired by, it was some old Army guys. So they didn't need the leadership sales pitch. They kind of knew what they were looking for. I was lucky in that sense. But when I went on interviews for other companies over the years, I struggled with that, man.
Yeah, companies not to be named, but I mean, it was a process. I think Sayre can attest to that. I found it helpful because there is a level of communication that you aren't prepared to have to translate those skills. So being able to set up, you know, when you're back-to-back interviews, going off of note cards, you're prepared. That's how we know how to do that. And
resume writing, that's the hard part.
Oh, sure.
And they helped with that too.
Yeah, these aren't OERs, right? I mean, they're you don't. There's a lot to it to sell.
You know what I think those JMOs helped with is junior military officer recruiters. So there's, I don't know, Bradley Morris Alliance. There's a half dozen of them that really heavily hammer young officers when they're coming out of the Army. So they're placement firms, right? And but anyways, the one thing that was definitely beneficial there was they put you in front of companies that were at least speaking the same language, so they knew the pool of talent, right? They knew you were going to come in and talk about military experience. When you're just hitting up a company's website out of the blue, that for me was a hard sell. That the latter.
And I think a distinction with Preston Steele is you've been in a lot of blue collar fields post. Now, maybe wearing a white collar itself, but in that sort of arena where we've been in that white, like finance or insurance, the startup sort of thing in the fancy city, like the white collar world. And that I think is its own animal and distinctions. Because I would think, and I haven't been in blue collar, right? So I can't speak to it. But I would think that there are probably more parallels with the blue collar and the military than white collar. But hey, Air Force, I think more white collar. If you're in the Air Force, probably a little different experience. I'm just talking to what kind of we know from our Army time.
Yeah, I mean, you're indoctrinated into a system where you're on a team, right? And when and that's oftentimes the hardest part of transition is that you no longer identify with the team. So for myself, when I transitioned out, I found a company that, there was a Navy guy on the team. And yeah, I mean, they were a team of technical people, more blue collar. And when I started getting into construction, it was the same dichotomy. You had that officer enlisted
Right.
where project manager and superintendent, right? So
Yeah.
Same team, trying to accomplish the goal, trying to line up resources, and leaning on their
A physical
experience.
accomplishment too, right? You're physically
Something
putting work
tangible.
in too with
Yeah.
your bodies.
Yeah. Well, you're solving problems, right? I mean, let's
Totally.
be real.
With
you're,
people.
You're coordinating, you're solving problems, and you get to see something tangible at the end of the day, like the live fire range. You get to see soldiers go through that plan.
That's a good point.
But then you can, but the big distinction, obviously, civilian versus not, is like when you did, doing those construction sites and whatnot, those guys can walk off, like they can quit. That's not the dynamic. So it's a different animal than what we had in the military, where people are forced, they're in it, right?
Yeah,
and you actually, it's hard to get rid of them. And a lot of times you don't want to, because you need every single person possible. So you just got to make do with who you got.
Yeah, when you got a bunch of hired guns, right? That's the way you look at it. So, for 25 cents more an hour, they're going to go to the other team. And
right.
That's where, speaking about the values of the company, or, being authentic with what you do is so important. You try to, but understanding, like, if somebody's in hardship or, whatever, there are definitely other circumstances that they're gonna take. So
Sayre brought up a good point right before we got on here, where it was kind of talking to those differences, where the mentality often from the military is, yes, sir, and you go do that thing no matter what. But there's a lot of times where somebody says, I ain't doing that. And the challenge is you can't fire them. They might be on your team for 3, 6, 9 more months. Maybe it's a 3-person team. Maybe it's a 30, but it doesn't matter. You've got somebody in that group that just says, I'm just not going to do whatever you say. And you got to figure that out. That's tricky, man.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that skill, working with a limited set of resources, still applies when you get out. It's it takes a long time to retrain somebody and bring them into your company, because every company is a little bit different. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that you got to work through.
So we, a lot of times, will kind of like run chronologically through some stuff, but I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say about IEDs in Afghanistan, because that was kind of that was what you did, right?
Yeah. So I joined, so I was with 3-1, 3rd Brigade, 1st Infantry Division. I was supposed to go to Fort Hood, and when I was at the Engineer Officer Basic Course, my fiance at the time, Megan, was working in Ohio after college, and I was with orders to go to Texas, trying to get a little closer to where she was at and kind of where I was at, and there was a academy cadet there, or officer there, and he wanted to be back in Texas. That's where he was from. So while we were at ODC, we swapped orders.
That's great.
Yeah, we swapped orders, and I was going to a heavy engineer unit in Texas, and that's what he wanted. But at the time, right after graduating, everybody wants to go in the fight, and for an engineer, that was being with a light brigade. So I was basically taking orders to be assigned to a special troops battalion that was in support of several other units. So there were a couple infantry battalions, a couple CAV battalion, the BSB, Brigade Support Battalion, and then the STB. And being able to, so essentially when you get in that type of unit, you get dished out. So you have your company of engineers. I want to say it was something like, 75 guys or something like that. And each squad so there are 2 platoons in that company, and each squad would get divvied up to a infantry company. So
before you go forward, I'm gonna back up and just let everybody know this kind of concept, brigade combat team. So what he's talking about is, I don't know, I think it was mid 2000s, the Army transferred to this brigade combat team model where there's maneuver units like infantry, cav, armor, there's an artillery unit, battalion. Brigade combat teams are around 4,000. It's a good ballpark estimate. They've got a support battalion, BSB, and then there's a special troops battalion, which is what Preston's talking about. And in that, you've got all these enablers that are kind of self-sustained within this brigade. So the idea is this brigade could deploy by itself. So within that special troops battalion, you had military intelligence, military police, engineers, and quite a few others. So this one battalion or one company of engineers then, as I'm sure you're getting ready to dive into, is their only job is to support that specific brigade.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's excellent context. Thanks. So when the engineers get deployed, you go in support of the other units. That's what I went to start doing. And
what's the timeline on this? Like when were you in doing the engineering basic or officer course? And then when were you showing up to Knox?
So my memory is not the best, but for everybody listening, if there are like cadets or whoever's out there, it was recommended to me to make an I love you book. And it's a great way to document like your career, and you put, special things in there, right? Like your OERs and little things like that you can reference back to your certificates. But it's one of the things that I did was put in like a chronological, like what I did. So, I mean, I graduated 2008, OBC, Sapper School, and then reported to my unit. Let's see. So that was 2009 into 2009. So 3-1 had just come back from Afghanistan to Fort Hood. They had a temporary site there. And then when they redeployed, they basically just redeployed back to Fort Knox. That Fort Knox, they had stood up the new home of 3-1 as a permanent site for them. And I reported directly to Fort Knox and started receiving soldiers in as an assistant battalion S3.
And you said this was after Sapper? So you went to Sapper.
So
engineering officers, what does that look like? Do you all get like slotting types opportunities? What does that look like?
Order of merit. So you go to school. You just go to the normal schoolhouse while you're going through the program. You volunteer, and then they basically create an order of merit, and you compete for whatever slots are available. Usually those are, because we were at Fort Leonard Wood, where Sapper School is. They have designated slots for that group. I think there was 10, something like that. I mean, it wasn't a lot. It's not like Ranger School where all infantry officers are required to go, or
But if an engineering officer raised their hand and said, I want to go, and they're in decent shape, was that enough slots for everybody to go?
I honestly don't remember, but
Gotcha.
I know that people were competing for it. So
only 10 that's not much, I would think, in a engineering cohort.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably 60 people in our 60 people in our class. So
I didn't realize that little tidbit about Fort Knox. When you were talking about getting closer than Texas, I thought you meant Fort Riley, Kansas. I was like, I don't know. I guess it's a little bit closer. Still pretty far out there. Yeah,
I mean, Fort Knox was home of armor, right? So when all of that was going down to Georgia, they kind of revamped that footprint over there. And they've got I think they moved the cadet training there as well.
Yeah.
That's Stewie's job.
That's what I do, man.
Nice.
Cadet summer training. That's right.
Somebody's got to do it.
Uh-huh.
LDAC.
Good for
He does.
you.
They host LDAC there. It is LDAC, right? It's not LTC. It's the in between junior and senior year.
I don't know what they call it. We on our end, we just call it cadet summer training because we kind of bounce. We're not like overseeing the whole thing. We're like tied into specific lanes.
Yeah.
So for us, it's cadet summer training as this big block and just go there from time to time.
Nice. So your original question was about IEDs and stuff. So getting there, I went to Sapper School. And if nobody knows what that's about, it's really 2 weeks in the classroom, 2 weeks in the field. Lots of advanced demo course or classes and how to work with different tools to do the same thing. So expedient demo and how to do different breaching charges. And then tactics. So it's kind of, so take, for example, Ranger School and the knots that you learn at Ranger School. In Sapper School, I think it's twice as many. And the way that Ranger School was, where you know the purpose and the checkpoints of the knot, of like an inline bow line, in Sapper School, it is very heavily weighted to know all of them. It's very detailed. I think in Ranger School, some of the guys were just, they're like, can you help this guy out? And they kind of check the block. Yep, go ahead. But Sapper School is definitely a graded item. And you do advanced mountaineering and things like that. A little bit of everything. So you do Pathfinder operations, you do airborne operations.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Setting up an LZ.
And you're doing patrolling too, just infantry patrolling too, right?
Yep.
And you went to Ranger School as well, right?
Yep.
So can you, is Sapper, like, I've heard people refer to it as Ranger School light, like the same thing, just shorter. Is that?
I'll say it's condensed. I mean,
Sure.
there's a lot on endurance with Ranger School. With Sapper School, it's a lot of thinking, a lot of tactical application. I mean, there's not as much graded on that, but while you're in the classroom, people don't make it out of the classroom. So once you get into the field, they know that it's short, but it's very, very condensed. So, and it was a pre-ranger for me, basically. So when I got out of Sapper School, I reported to Fort Knox, and I think I was there about 6 months, and then picked up a Ranger School slot. And then I went to Ranger School.
That is not easy to get for anybody. Again, one man's experience. I feel like Ranger School slots are hard to get once you're out in the active Army, because they kind of expect officers to, on the officer side, they expect officers to knock it out right after OBC. So it seemed like in strike, at least, they pushed those slots towards the enlisted soldiers, which is great. It really helps their career. But especially if you're not infantry, that's a tough slot to get, man.
Yeah. And so going back a little bit, I mean, I wanted to be infantry, right? And where I ranked on the order of merit, I fell in engineering, and it was such a blessing in disguise because I got to see so many other things, right? And be a part of the Special Troops Battalion. Looking at Ranger School, I think being able to come into a receiving unit, receiving soldiers, and being able to show some leadership and take control of the situation and impress the other leadership, I think warranted that opportunity to compete for that slot. And working amongst the infantry, that was an easy sell. I mean, we were sappers, and to be able to kind of inculcate with the infantry was important. So,
and that's probably it is a big distinction that I'm sure we're going to get into, is the sapper piece being offensive, infantry, destroy, things in front of you and obstacles, right? It's not defensive the way you're not hurt locker, right? It's
Right.
not for someone that's probably not military oriented. They might confuse the two and think that a sapper is the same as a EOD because you're both blowing things up. But the sappers that right hand, they're heck, when you have obstacles on the beach in Normandy, who's going first? It's the freaking sappers, you know? I mean, they're all right there off the boat. And again, that's offensive against someone else's defensive things. I mean, that's how I understand them, right? Not being trained up in that way, but also knowing that you're definitely not, especially in this GWAT era we're going to get into with IEDs and all that, that is not your skill set.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's there's a lot to it, but there's a lot of it is taking doctrine and applying tactics tactically. So where you might remove an obstacle in doctrine, right? Like that was part of our mission, was to remove obstacles, eliminate barriers. Well, how do you know, there's a process to do that in doctrine. So proofing, right? So whether you're in a minefield with a guys, it's been so long, I can't remember any of this old information, but if you're probing for mines, whatever it's called.
Oh yeah, those...
when you're probing for mines, right? Like they teach you in basic training how to clear a minefield, basically, or they did when I
with the little stick.
Yeah, with a bayonet, right? So you go in a particular angle. But anyway, it's the concept of proofing a minefield, right? So how you proof it and you mark it, right? And then you eliminate. So same concepts remain true for IEDs. And it's just applying that doctrine to the current tactic. And that's, that was a great lesson I learned on the battlefield. I mean, it's like, you know, how do you think about this? Well, doctrine still applies.
Before we went downrange, we had all those, you know, get ready for IEDs type briefings. It was like it was a different language before experiencing them. So they were saying all sorts of stuff and pressure plate and victim operated. And like I generally knew what it was, but it really wasn't sinking in. And I think it was like a 1 hour class or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Just a brief intro. We got another one. They kept happening. So a little more in depth, but did you guys do more focus on like TTPs, what are being seen in Afghanistan before you went? Like you were more dialed in than what I just described, right?
So that's the beauty of the Army, right? So with our original mission being tied to you know, the light infantry guys and being divvied up to assist and support the infantry guys, we trained up. We went to NTC, and our mission was to basically hold land. So for a year we trained up. So I got back from Ranger School and took my platoon, and for the year we trained up for that mission, doing live fires, doing all the training that any infantry unit would train up for.
And let me stop you real quick. You're training as an organic platoon.
Yeah.
You're not divvying them out at this point, right?
Exactly.
You are, okay.
Change of mission, right? So change of mission, we were going to be landowners, right? You know, got the freshly minted Ranger tab ready to go. I know my patrolling, right? So we were a month from going to NTC, and they said, hey, by the way, we're going to change your mission. You guys are actually going to be route clearance. So we had all of these soldiers trained up, you know, to be an infantryman, and we did a change of mission, and we showed up to NTC and basically did convoy operations. I think that they had a couple pieces of equipment. No, that's not. So we did our traditional mission while there. In the background, we were working on getting guys out to learn how to operate a Buffalo, right? The big truck that has the arm on it. How to operate the ground penetrating radar. You know, just how to use these tools, just at very basic level, how to use these tools to start the process.
This was at NTC, which, I mean, did you even know what a Buffalo was prior to NTC and all that?
Yeah, so I mean, we did in EOBC.
Oh, you did?
Basic course. You go through route clearance and the officers do for sure. But you know, going down to kind of the enlisted level of education.
Sure.
I think that they were more versed on. So we had 11 Bravos, 12 Bravos, and those guys were equipment operators. We had a small section of equipment operators with us, so that they could do improvements to a cop or a base or something. And then the rest of them were combat engineers. So very versatile group, but I'm sure they didn't spend a lot of time in the schoolhouse talking about IEDs.
Which is kind of crazy. Like when you think about, we had an artillery battalion that became landowners. I can see that a little bit more because there just wasn't that much artillery fire. You didn't need a full artillery battalion, especially the 105s that the 101st had. That makes a little more sense. But at this time, the IED threat was so high, like I feel like you could have tripled the number of RCP units across Afghanistan and they would have been used. There were units all across the country waiting for route clearance, like at all times. So it sounds weird that the unit didn't think that was going to be the mission. I mean, I know stuff changes and don't have the full background.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of, and the need was there for sure. When we ripped into country, we assumed equipment from 2 different National Guard units. We basically flew in, so we were in RC East, and we basically flew out to these outposts, picked up their equipment, and drove them to FOB Salerno. So
what was the time frame?
2010. Yeah.
Month?
Yeah.
Fall?
2011. So we left, I think it was Christmas Eve.
Of 10.
Yeah, of 10. And
December
then,
of 10.
Yep. And then we came back New Year's Eve, which was cool. We redeployed on New Year's Eve. So that was quite the party. But yeah. So when we went, it's a complete year.
When you were there, how are you doing route clearance? Was it the major highways? I was in RC East for a little bit, but at a big base and didn't get too far. I don't know. We got back in the valleys a couple times, but there's like one road down some of those valleys. Is that the stuff you guys were clearing?
Yeah. So in our operating area, we basically had 2 missions. One is to maintain the routes, and the other mission was to go on main mission. So particular routes. So we basically, the first 6 months or so, I was a platoon leader, going on the missions and really executing on main missions. Halfway through my time, we then started to do maintenance. So we would maintain routes in red, amber, green status, and that was really based on time. And after 24 hours, the route would degrade or something like that. Whatever the timeline was for somebody to emplace an IED. So knowing that one guy would get paid to emplace the IED, one guy would get paid to connect the IED, and one guy would get paid to detonate the IED, right? So that those are all very low level TTPs. We were trying to identify the TTPs, but also identify who's fabricating or manufacturing these IEDs, because that was the big red flag, is when all these IEDs look the same, they're all wrapped in yellow tape, right? And after doing the battlefield assessments, we're collecting stuff, we're seeing numbers on the bottom of them. Yeah, it was definitely, oh yeah, I mean that.
So that all goes up, right, to the
so
intel guys.
You're gonna challenge my memory on this one.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I know. So these EOD guys, they had a lab that they would basically do like forensic testing on anything that we could collect, taking fingerprints, taking samples of the chemical makeup of the IED, to really route it back to a network of, can they tie that particular makeup of IED back to the guy who's making it. and then that's where you eliminate that threat. You know, you're going up the chain of the supply to eliminate that.
I want to go back to the route colors that you hit on briefly, and I know the numbers change, but we'll go with the 24 hours because I think that was pretty standard at times. But think about that for anybody listening. Like, that means that if a road hasn't been driven down with mine clearing equipment, radar equipment in 24 hours, it's assumed to have an IED on it. That's crazy. They were everywhere, and they were so fast at putting them in. And it's just, when you say it like that, it sounds impossible to, like, it's whack-a-mole.
I got one. One time we were coming back from Strong Point Dog on Route Tennessee, which was like our company cop, our fort in the wilderness. Route Tennessee, we cut in the middle of a field with British engineers and a bulldozer, and to go back to the fob on a refit. And those, you kind of had trips going throughout the day, really, because the fob wasn't that far away. Not at all, really. But we were in an area where it was called moon dust. It would come up past your shins of this really airy, light dust. And that route was probably, it's just ruts in the middle of a field. And this was daylight. There was a truck on that route at least, or not at least, but within an hour, it's probably only been 30 to 40 minutes before somebody was on Route Tennessee. And I had to go back to the Strong Point. And my vehicle, I drove as the lead vehicle, just Ford trucks, and hit a pressure plate cap went off. It went off, the blasting cap went off. And it was oriented to hit the people coming back because they left. And actually the plate was under the driver's, it was like, actually it was stacked so that the front wheel would hit the plate, but the HME jug was below. It was behind it like 5 feet. Normally the anti-personnel were directly below, but anyway, it was staggered. But it was a buried HME jug. And they did that within, like I said, 30 minutes, 40 minutes in the daylight. We have blimps, we've got ISR, all of that stuff. And so when you're talking like 24 hours and all of that, it's definitely a real thing because they're always watching you and maneuvering constantly.
Yeah, and I mean they'd bury those things for months. I mean they would bury them when they could, you know, and they would just let the road weather. You couldn't tell. I mean, that's having the ISR, having the ground penetrating radar. You're trying to find, you know, that buried treasure, you know.
Did you see any developments while you were there, like from start to finish? Any TTPs the enemy changed that made it harder to find? That's a short window, I know.
Not really. I mean, yeah, it's hard in a year. I think they just did what worked, you know. Like, why change? Who was changing was the American soldiers coming in. So yeah, we could walk down the route in a reverse V, you know, and try to capture those command detonated wires first before. But you know, things like, it's so hard to find a guy who you know detonates an IED and runs off, jumps on a scooter and goes off. I mean, and he's not the threat.
So you had a lot of command wire, command det?
Yeah. Command wires, pressure plates, primarily what we saw. I mean,
what was the explosive? Was it homemade HME or was it ordnance?
I want to say it was both.
Yeah.
I mean, we also saw the whole cell phone thing. I mean, that was very prevalent in the tactics that we took on.
Really?
Yeah. So just we got heavy, and I think from Iraq we learned, you know, just applying the jammers.
Yeah.
So how we would convoy and just create a barrier with jammers through a high area. So you're as you're planning that mission, you're planning where the hot spots are, and that was part of when I took over the XO position. Really focused on tracking better data, we really looked at, you know, when there was a detonation or there was an event, we would identify the type, you know, what size did we think it was, what was the type, so that we could then start creating our own TTPs for that particular area as they change. So, you know, recognizing that, you know, and we could also provide that information to the other units who are going down that area. So if we were going on a named mission, I would go in and I would give, you know, their battalion, you know, that brief or that PL or whoever, if we were that asset, to say, hey, what's part of that planning process? What are you guys seeing in this area? So we can better plan for it.
IEDs are one of those things that, like, I'm fascinated with it, is maybe there's got to be a better word, but they became cheaper and easier to make over time. We talked about this HME, homemade explosive. That's, I don't know the price point I'm putting those together, but probably under $10 for an IED all in, with the wiring that you can get out of the dump off a bicycle seat. We were talking about Sayre's war trophy IED that he's got. They're so easily put together that can kill or destroy these massive vehicles. And we did not figure that out. We don't know how to beat that. And it's not like the US wasn't doing something in 2020 because we weren't there. Like, we don't have a solution to that. And that's interesting to me because it can be done again. Should be done again, honestly. Anybody watching Iraq and Afghanistan, that's got to be the go-to.
We didn't even have command net or the cell phone, fancy cell phone type stuff. It was just that rudimentary pressure plate with something underneath of it, ordnance or the HME. So rudimentary though, scrap parts. They don't even need, because we would have, like, the traditional pressure plate is going to be that wooden plank or the pallet board with bicycle seat springs, you know, and then closing it when you step on it. But hey, that's a metal. You know, we also found like a tire, a rubber tire, as the bendy part. You just take the top end of it like that.
Yeah.
Where it's just that half moon, no spring on the side. Still have the metal wire, of course, but they knew we were using metal detectors, right? And they're always improvising, and so are we, though, right? It's a chess game.
Yeah, there was a lot of, you know, when they saw the metal detectors come out, they're watching, right? So we then went to ground penetrating radar detectors. And that's where, you know, in the same line of thought is, you know, at our disposal, thanks to the US government and their money, or our money, you know, it was really, we had contractors who were, that's what their job was, to find better equipment so that we could better defeat, to accomplish that mission, you know. So, you know, whether it was Mantech or whoever the contractor was of the year, they were bringing in new technology to apply in the field. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely an interesting component of how their tactics change. So do we.
Do you think?
And I think I was just going to say real quick on the ID piece to Stu's point about, basically you're alluding to they're going to be used again, right? You know, when we have another sort of counterinsurgency type thing, or local militia, I don't know what you would want to describe that, but but think about this though. Next time, yes, but it's going to also be where the other side has drones. So just think about that 3D battle space of that thing flying around and blowing up. We didn't have to necessarily worry about our head cover. The Taliban did, of course. They had to really worry about their head cover, but I feel like that's going to be the next evolution too. On top of that, just drones and not just a linear spot that you walk on either.
Yeah, we're going down a slippery slope, man. I mean, yeah, like what's the usefulness of having boots on the ground in that type of fight, right? I mean, right? I mean, like, it's what do we what type of fight do we really need to get into these days? So you know, look at current events. I mean, sending 3,400 troops to you know, as what? That's more traditional warfare, but I mean,
not much, all things
Look,
considered.
you bring up a good point. When we to use the Afghanistan example again in Kandahar, the Taliban, for who knows how much money, again, $10 an IED or less, essentially eliminated our ability to operate in Zari. There were roads we couldn't go on. It would take us 3 hours to go 2 kilometers. There were buildings that you just plain didn't go to because there were way too many IEDs to even mess with. They won that fight by doing that. I mean, they completely removed our ability to have the influence needed in the area, I'd say. We couldn't be as dispersed, couldn't be as responsive, couldn't be as fast. Yeah, so then I guess that the next question then is boots on the ground. Is that the actual move?
Well, I think, you know, leaders were very risk adverse too. I mean, look, I mean, we were our own worst enemy at times. Look at what we were wearing, you know, we joke about it, but PT belts, right? I mean, if we're going to be, are we in the fight to win? I mean, that's what you have to ask ourselves. It's like, you know, I think that's where a lot of my mentality, I mean, I was, you know, I drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, I'm, you know, I'm better for it. However, the flexibility, I'm also an entrepreneur, but, you know, the flexibility to, if the goal is to win, what do we need to do? Right. And within the ethics that we follow. Right. And when you have a route clearance platoon creeping down along Route Alaska, and you have a infantry platoon who's mounted behind you, and they're chomping at the bit to go get these guys. And so you create this, you know, what's the risk of going down that route, right? And that's where you have a commander who's motivated to get the mission done without losing anybody, right? And it's how do you manage those risks to accomplish that mission? So you have to think creatively about that. And that's, I'm not going to get on a tangent, but I will say that we need to be able to create better leaders who think creatively. You know what I mean? And encourage that.
I'll ride that tangent
Everywhere.
for a minute. Is that something you felt at the time? Like when you were there, could you see some of the inflexibility, or maybe to take it to this last August, the unlikelihood of success overall in Afghanistan, or is this something more you've seen the further you get from it?
Yeah,
like retrospectively.
Yeah, I think it comes with experience. I mean, you know, it starts when you're in school, and you know, there's a certain system that you're put into, and I remember distinctively one of my mentors had told me when I was still in ROTC, he told me, you know, nobody's going to take care of you but you. And while I heard him say that, the green machine keeps rolling, right? And that's, I think a good leader is going to make sure that they are following their guiding path. So, you know, but when I brought that up, you know, that wasn't a popular thing to say to younger cadets, like, hey, make sure that it wasn't meant to be uncooperative or undisciplined. It was, hey, that packet that you're putting together to go to that school, you need to make sure you get it done. Like, don't wait for somebody else to do it. Like, don't wait for somebody to do it. So if you're going to take care of yourself, you want to go do that, then take care of it. Make sure it gets done. But the system is, you know, some people just want to be told what to do or be handed what to do. And that goes through whether it was Airborne School or Air Assault School while I was as a cadet, or Sapper School or Ranger School, right? You're always kind of going up to that next level, or so you think. But all along the way, there's still a segment of those people who they're just going by to get by, right? And if we're performance oriented, if we're thinking longevity, we have to be thinking creatively and not just rewarding people who follow that system. So I have been out a while. I don't know, maybe it's changed.
Now, I would say this, though. I do think that the military does do, in a way, a good job of, this sounds ironic, but challenging status quo. And what I mean by that is,
Oh, 100%. I agree. I
especially
do
when
agree.
you're going to war. Well, what I mean by like maybe it's different in the training time, like the 90s, maybe that was different. I don't know. I can't speak to it. But like what doesn't work is the statement, well, we've always done it this way. It's like, well, if we apply that mentality, you know, my training books were to fight the Soviets. So if we're going to look backwards and status quo, that's not going to work because we're not fighting the Soviets right now. We need to we can't do status quo. We got to invent some new way of doing things. And by the way, it's great the unit's been to Iraq for 3 years. Great. But this is Afghanistan, you know, it's different. And so it's like, you cannot be backwards facing. You got to be oriented. You got to learn from it, but then you got to apply it. And that's like that's risk. You know, people might die because of this. And I think that ultimately is the art of warfare piece.
Sure. Yeah, I think the military challenges the civilian population all the time, and I think that we do bring a different perspective because we're put in situations that we do have to problem solve, right? So I think that's what does differentiate us from our counterparts. My point of that was just, you know, let's challenge that. I mean, we still have to challenge
Always
in every organization.
Yep. Communication, bottom up refinement.
Yeah.
You know, you want to be in an environment where people feel free to speak suggestions, right? Quasi opinions, whatever you want to call them. The recommendations, you want to take feedback and stuff. Hopefully,
you should listen to it, right? I mean, like that, you should be open to feedback. And I think that my goal has always been just surround myself with great people, right? And I think, and get out of their way. I mean, geez, like find the best soldiers, find the best members to be on the team. And I still use the term, you know, remove and eliminate obstacles, right? Like let them do their job, let them feel satisfaction from what they do so that they, you know, they get to look back at the end of the day and say, yeah, that was worth doing. Yeah, I mean,
it's a people game.
Oh, it is.
It's a people game.
People make the difference 110%.
You
know, that's
I agree with you.
Go ahead.
I was going to agree with you. I was going to say about the Afghanistan piece and the challenges that you were talking about, though, right? It sounds like you were, I mean, what you were getting at, were you alluding to you wanted to do more, essentially? Did you feel handcuffed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, come on. Yeah, of course you feel handcuffs when, you know, you got riot control rounds with you and, you know, people freak out. You know, like the type of investigation that would happen if your rifle was fired. I mean, come on. So I don't know. I mean, to go back to the people thing, I think that is the most important thing. And I think that that's what ties everybody together, right? And for me, it was just making sure that those guys understood the mission so that when we came home, that they knew that it was worth it, right? And I think that starts with developing a relationship. So as a young leader, connecting with all of them and trying to, you know, just getting into the details. Who are they? What are they about? You're not just a number, you know, we're going to combat and I want you guys to know that I'm there with you. So understanding who they are and that sentiment, I think, goes throughout and just making sure that, and a lot of that still continues today. I mean, I'm sure you guys have the same thing. You're staying in contact with some of those guys and we have that shared experience. So
how did you balance that? I agree. I really like that, the mindset of making sure people know that what they did mattered, no matter what it was. Everything was important. And I stand by that. No matter the conflict, no matter the time, on the individual level, what people were doing was important in some way, shape, or form. How did you navigate that this past August when things kind of deteriorated in Afghanistan? Were you in touch with any of your soldiers? I'm sure people have asked you, how do you feel about this? What's your kind of go-to down that route?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much behind that answer, but, you know, I think that it started with transition out, right? And getting involved with different veteran organizations and the Team RW Red, White, and Blue in Kansas City, and just really connecting with the veteran organizations, and jump forward to August, and Sayre, obviously he's been a lifelong friend and brother of mine, and working around the clock. Everybody was exercising every resource that they had. I don't know, Stu, if you were involved with it either, but Sayre and his wife were up night after night. I mean, we were on vacation, and I was up all night. We were more Sayre. I was
Hearing what Sayre did,
because he was like that.
exhausting.
Yeah, he was that CP man. He was that dude. He was amazing through that, and I
was lucky to have the bandwidth. I had the bandwidth at that time, so it was a good lineup.
But when you needed to sleep, your wife stepped up. Like, how cool was that? I mean, she took over. So it was just information overload, flying left and right. Meanwhile, it's so I'm kind of created a sense of purpose as well. But they got some guys out. And, as far as what other people were asking me, of course we had our opinions, and I feel like I definitely remember like being in and hearing the news or hearing the headlines, and there's so much more than just what those headlines are, though, right? And it's trying to filter out through those headlines to understand what's really going on and what those units are tactically doing, right? You don't know the 1,000 variables that are going into this decision. So you do what you can with the information you have.
That was an eye-opener for me after coming back, because it was the time period where all of our friends are there, right? If you're not in Afghanistan, then there was always somebody there, and I imagine it's the same for you. You kind of wanted to keep up with like what was happening in your area. I was surprised at how impossible it was to do that. There were not news articles, maybe an occasional news article, but they were super high level. You can't find information, even in the midst of the war. You couldn't keep up with what was going on at that level at all.
And I'm sure it was not accurate. I mean, that's what I learned from the August stuff, of being sort of not on the ground, but pretty damn close to eye level. And then seeing the story that's told big picture, and the really big disconnect of like, what, that is like just not true. And I'm sure that the same happened with deployment. We're on the ground, like we're like all there at the eye level doing it. But you don't have time to read the news articles, right? Nor do you have like the internet to be able to read them. But I would think, looking back, if we were to like do that real time and see the output of the media versus what we were actually doing on ground, I'm sure there's a huge disconnect. I was too busy on deployment to be able to put that together. But in August, it was in your face too, just as hey, I was in America, and guess what? The news media is all up in your face all the time.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the headlines are. That's part of the information war is just accuracy, and it's like, well, perception isn't always reality. So yeah, it's definitely unless you're in it, you kind of lose those details
Real quick.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we're about at the hour anyway, aren't we? I thought, before we wrap it up, you mentioned, you did the red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
You got out of the Army and went to a new, strange land with new people all over again in a new field. And then finally found your way back to Columbus, Ohio now, where, Preston is involved. And it's real cool to see him, because we're talking about people this whole time. We're talking about IEDs and engineers and sappers and rangers. But, all of this stuff is with people. And now Preston owns his own company, making products and leadership with all of his people. So it's real cool to listen to him apply. He's doing it for real, right? He's doing all these things. And we were talking about resumes and junior military officer recruiting. you're still paying fealty, and trying to get in somebody's good graces. And Preston's one of the people that if you don't like it, fix it, do something about it. And so to go off on your own, it's really cool to see those success stories. Yeah, it's possible, right?
There's always a way to the deal. I mean, you know, if there's anything anybody takes away, it's, you know, make sure you're networking. You know, there are opportunities, and don't settle for bad leadership. You know what I mean? Like that, there are too many opportunities out there for people. And if they're not, then you can make your own.
I like it. Well, Preston, thanks for taking the time to do this, man. And we'll figure out the name situation next time. I don't know, maybe flip a coin. We'll see. But
yeah, definitely. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, my email is P as in Preston Steele, Steele at forum, FORUMWRKS.com. So happy to connect with anybody. And I think we just scratched the surface, so we might have a round two with you guys. I don't know.
I like it.
Well, we are going to have a meeting of the Prestons at some point in Ohio at the cabin. It's bound to happen. So it will happen, and that'll be fun.
We'll throw that email in the show notes if anybody wants it. But Preston, good talking, man. Looking forward to staying in touch.
All right. Thanks, guys.